Welcome back to another episode of the AltMed podcast series. I'm with my co-host, as always, Mitch Kurtz. Before we introduce our special guest today, I just want to reiterate to really just hit like and subscribe if you're getting any value out of these podcasts. We've had a few people come up to us and tell us that they think what we're doing is great. We've had even more people tell us that it's okay. But yeah, we really hope that you're getting some value out of it. So yeah, do hit like and subscribe. All right. So without any further delay, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest, who comes from another part of the industry that I think often sort of sits a little bit quietly in the corner that people don't really talk about. But we've got Vince Murone from Australian Cannabis Laboratories, and he's here today to tell us all about his lab and product testing. So Vince, welcome. We are so glad to have you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Mitch. It's been an honour. It's been an honour to actually join this. So happy to give our perspective on what we do in the industry. I suppose we do have a little bit of a backseat role to play. It goes somewhat under the radar, but there's certainly you can't ignore the fact that the industry requires a certain amount of testing, and so we provide that facility and knowledge, and hopefully tonight we'll probably put some perspective on exactly what the lab does, its role, and how it's helping the industry, understand the quality of the cannabis that's coming to market, and hopefully the audience can probably get a better understanding of our role. So happy to.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's an invaluable role and one that, yeah, I mean, we'll unpack there. There's so much to discuss, but perhaps before we dive into the lab, can you tell us a little bit about your background? I guess you know what you're trained in and how you fell into testing people's weed.
Yeah. My background is analytical chemistry, so I'm what's regarded as a residue analytical testing chemist. And what that means, I look at low levels of contamination or low levels of residue, environmental residue, in any particular matrix. Now, that's the background, the general background. So as an analytical chemist, you look for very small amounts of compounds or contaminants, and you use instrumental analysis in understanding what you have in your product or your particular matrix. So in this instance, and what we've done in the lab is transfer our knowledge in analytical chemistry to an understanding of what needs to be tested in medicinal cannabis. And we came upon medicinal cannabis about 3 years ago when the licensing, or 4 years ago when the licensing for cultivation and manufacturing was about to come onto the market, and those who applied were really new to the industry. Some came from different backgrounds, botanical backgrounds, horticulture, also just a lot of business types. So we felt as chemists we could sort of add to the industry. We knew the testing needed to be done and be a significant part of the industry, and we basically used our tools that we were applying every day to other work to really work on medicinal cannabis, understand exactly what the requirements were, and obviously mandated testing was there, and the TGA and the ODC really published a lot of information, or some information, I wouldn't say a lot, but some information and guidelines about what they wanted to see. So it was born from that, understanding the requirements of testing, and we put those in place. We had the tools to do the testing, not all of them at the time, but we had a majority of those tools, and they involved what we call as chromatographic instrumentation, HPLC, GC. I can explain a bit more about those. And so we use those tools to basically implement the mandated, what's called the mandated TGO 93 program.
Yeah, and for those unfamiliar, TGO 93, as best as I understand it, is the Australian minimum quality standard for medicinal cannabis.
Yes, that's right. It is the minimum standard. given it's an unapproved medicine, as we know and understand at the moment. So the TGA have what they call these TGO programs. This happens to be the medicinal cannabis one, and there's been lots of others for other type of, sort of unapproved medicines over time. This is specifically for the botanical, medicinal cannabis botanical sativa, cannabis sativa. So it's a set of minimum standard guidelines. Well, the guidelines are a set of minimum standards. They set out the procedures, in a sense, to procedures for testing based on some European pharmacopoeia. And so they set out a schedule, what's called the Schedule 1 testing program, and there's a battery of tests in those. And then there's also a series of tests around potency, which is probably the more quite significant test around that because of the economic impact on medicinal cannabis and its value.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, those standards. I mean, from a public policy angle, the TGA mandates certain thresholds, which I know that a lot of manufacturers will be coming to labs like yours to ensure that their products stay within those thresholds. So the TGA wants medicinal cannabis to have, no more than a, minuscule amount of, foreign matter, ash, the ochratoxins. So these are all part of what you would be testing for. And I understand that, there's also TGO 100, so the microbial standard that products need to meet. And all of this really points to a bigger picture that sort of says that this legal market that was created some 4-5 years ago, is subject to so much more stringent regulation than black market. And I just interested, just because it's popped into my head, has anyone ever actually brought any black market products to your lab for testing?
Look, certainly, over the last 4 years, there has been, I think, several attempts to do that. Look, it's hard to stamp that out. You do as much as you can. Some things come in labelled. You think they're within the regulation. There may be a product they've got as a prescription. It turns out that some of it is a prescription-based cannabis medicine, so that's fine. No, there have been particular attempts to test something that's from the black market. I mean, look, it's one of those things that I warn them that if I see any THC levels that are above 0.5%, then that stuff is really, and I don't have a particular, say, for example, a cannabis manufacturing or cultivation license from them, then it really is something I can't proceed with. Look, yeah, it is a difficult one to navigate. Generally, the workload that comes from the legitimate market is quite good and sufficient. You don't need to go to the black market to do any of this work. But look, yeah, some stuff, I think 1 or 2 things, or 3 things have probably come through in the past, but I haven't proceeded any further than expressing my results at the THC level.
Results and reservations, perhaps.
Yeah, you just do that. You just have to say, look, we've got reservations around these samples, and I can't proceed any further than that. Without
in some senses, it's a bit of a shame, because there's a lot of people that are receiving products from here and there and everywhere, really, that don't really know what they're taking.
I know, and that's the thing that's about it. You look, it's a hard one to address on the phone with some people. They say, look, I've got this product, and I just say, look, you really want to be asking where you've got this from. I try to ask a few questions more, but I don't deliberately inquire much more, except to say that, look, if this THC level's high, if I test it for you, I'll let you know that it's quite high, but I won't express any further results. I'll leave it at that. It is a challenge.
We've kind of gone on this tangent very early in the podcast, but since
it's a reality. It's a reality of this industry.
Since we're here, I'm just curious: is there anything that the average person can kind of do at home to test if they do have received something and they're wondering, rather than potentially getting sick or being
there's probably, I think there are kits out there to test your CBD or THC levels,
like a mobile chromatography kit. It's like
well,
your house. Yeah,
bring it to your house. Yeah. Oh, they're probably diagnostic kits. They're maybe colorimetric. They might give a particular color, a bit like maybe when they're looking for illicit material, where they, it's sort of perhaps at the airports where they might find some illicit material and they try to work out exactly what it might be.
Yeah.
There are kits along those lines which might be semi-quantitative. Generally, yeah. I mean, do they know what if the THC level's too high, or have they got mycotoxin contamination? They got heavy metals. Look, it is a difficult one to solve, and generally, it's best to avoid, but it is not. I wouldn't say it's impossible to avoid sometimes. When samples are sometimes just sent to the lab, and they come in as a particular number, you look at it, you don't know where, and you try to work out what's going on. So usually it's if people are reluctant to provide their name and details, then those sort of things sort of send an alarm bell a little bit. And so I try not to proceed any further. I have ignored quite a lot of stuff. I get a lot of emails. I have to ignore it. It's so blatantly obvious what the attempt is trying to do, and it is what it is. Yeah.
Well, out of curiosity, so when I think about your work, I think white lab coat, a beaker, some colourful liquids going through tubes all around the lab. What to break it down for people listening that might not have a background in chemistry?
Yes.
What does a typical kind of analysis entail? Like, how does it kind of work in the?
Yeah, sure.
I think that she's referring to us, by the way, because we don't have background in chemistry.
Look, a typical analysis. I'll tell you how it works in the lab. Okay, we've got some legitimate product. We've got some CBD. We've got some terpenes in the mixture. It's a whole plant extract. It might be an isolate. It's botanical material. Okay, it's wrapped up in the lovely labels. It's got the potency label on there, THC quantities or CBD, different ratios of CBD to THC. It's all very, very looks very authentic, and it is. Obviously, it's in a bottle, it's in a container. Well, the first thing you do is you've got to, from a lab point of view, you've got to log it in. You've got to weigh it. You've got to know. You've got to record exactly the information that's on the container. This is done through what's called a chain of custody, where you get a document that's basically signed off on from the client that says, I want this tested, and there's a whole battery of tests which we put on the chain of custody. Those tests are basically ticked off for those that they want potency done, they want terpenes, they want mycotoxins, they may want heavy metals. So people select the battery of tests. The full complement of tests are on the chain of custody, and that completes what we call the TGO battery of tests. Sometimes, a lot of the time, in fact, it's a potency test. And so the sample arrives, it's logged in, the chain of custody is signed off, it's returned to the client acknowledging that we've received the sample, and we'll undergo the test. The sample is really, it's really taken up into the lab, and it's basically, if it's in the case of a botanical, it's homogenized. So a subsample of what we receive is homogenized in a grinder to a very small particle size. We often use liquid nitrogen to sample the botanical material, so we actually create a homogeneous botanical mix. Then a subsample of that, it may well be, for example, 1 gram of material is subsample from 10 grams. And that's extracted in a particular solvent. There are various solvents used in the industry. Ethanol is really one of the better ones to use, particularly for botanical, and a lot of the industry would use that anyway. It's cheap to purchase, accessible. I think at that point you extract it out. You may have to dilute it, which means you just dilute the extract into another solvent, and then present it to the instrument. You present it to the instrument in a vial. It just happens to be a vial that has a liquid in it. And against that, you also test a series of standards. So you basically use what I call a liquid ruler, a series of standards which allows you to work out what's in the unknown, and you run that and present that to the instrument as well. And of course, you have up to two different types of instruments for analysis: HPLC, or high performance liquid chromatography, or UPLC, ultra high performance liquid chromatography. They're more or less the same, but UPLC is a more advanced and superior technique in doing potency testing. You may have GCMS as well. That's for pesticide testing and also for terpenes. And you may have another instrument that has a particular detector for mycotoxin testing. And so
these machines, they're effectively, this is really showing how little I know, but is it effectively firing light at the sample? How does it work?
Yes. What it is, for example, if we go to the HPLC or the liquid chromatograph, basically you present a sample in a liquid form, which you then, it's basically injected, if I can put it that way. A sample is injected onto what we call a HPLC column. It's just a long stainless steel column with a particular packed material in there of a certain chemistry, and it's that chemistry that allows us to separate the individual cannabinoids. For example, we're talking about potency testing. So those cannabinoids travel at different speeds along the HPLC column, and they basically we use the term elute from the column, and they elute from the column and basically they enter a detector. And the detector is usually a UV visible detector. And so the eluent, which has the cannabinoid in it, that small amount of cannabinoid you're measuring, it passes through the detector, and the detector senses it or picks it up that something has been measured, and it's the absorbance of that cannabinoid, the absorbance of that particular compound that then is the software then uses that absorbance measurement and represents it in a particular way. And this way it represents it in what we call a chromatogram. And it's just a series of peaks and troughs, basically, that allow us to determine the type of compound we're interested in. Have we got THC or THCA or CBD? And they all come out at a specific time under strict conditions. And that specific time is called a retention time. And it's unique to that particular instrument at that particular setup. So we can then use that to standardize our instrumental analysis along with a series of standards, and then we can use those to determine how much of each cannabinoid is in there. So it's really a UV detector, like getting back to your original question. It is not say firing light, but the light that's transmitted through the detector is interfered with by the passage of this cannabinoid coming out at a specific time, and that's how we measure it. Yeah.
I see. And so what are some of the trends that you're seeing in the lab? What kinds of cannabinoids are you seeing en masse? Are you seeing anything interesting coming through in recent times?
Yeah. Look. The lab is doing pretty much what we call the big four sticks: THCA, THC, CBD, and CBDA. Okay, so we're well characterized. Obviously, in a clinical setting, these are the cannabinoids of interest. We know that. Further to that, of course, we do other cannabinoids. We do probably another 6 to 7 cannabinoids, and these are very small quantities of cannabinoids that they're biosynthesized. They're synthesized within the plant, depending on where the sort of metabolic, or not metabolic, the biosynthetic pathway of the plant and what it's producing. But you get things like CBG. CBG is what we call a primary cannabinoid. From CBG, you get your THC and your CBDs, depending on the pathway. And then you get your acid forms. The plants, the raw material, the botanical material, the botanical flower produces the cannabinoids in different quantities, depending on the genetics, obviously. But it's producing a whole lot of other cannabinoids. Now, why it's doing that, obviously there's a lot of work going on understanding that principle and why it's doing that. It seems to do with the stability of the plant, maybe. Maybe there's just a lot of metabolic pathways within that plant. Basically, cannabinoids that we detect and determine are CBG, CBC. These are cannabichrome type analogues. There's also other ones called CBLs. They all occur in both neutral and acid forms. The acid forms is the native form. The neutral forms are there in smaller amounts, but the acid forms generally, depending on the conditions, convert over to the neutral forms. They're not all psychoactive. THC and some of the THC analogues are, but the CBD ones aren't. But they are obviously therapeutic value.
Yeah,
so there's about 11 or 12 we currently measure, what we call the extended list.
Yeah.
And we can do more, but they're very expensive to buy, some of these standards. So, we tend to do it on.
I know a lot of people are starting to get into terpenes and asking about what kind of terpenes they're seeing as kind of complementary to the main.
Absolutely. Yeah. Terpenes, very interesting. Obviously, people have talked about this entourage effect, even within a clinical setting. So the terpenes are, they're obviously part of a different pathway within the plant, but the cannabis has what I see is probably a unique set of terpenes coming through that I see, which we don't see in probably some other plants. Other plants do produce terpenes, of course. It's not unique to cannabis, but obviously the aroma of cannabis that everyone is aware of, a lot of people are aware of, obviously as a result of the terpenes. You do see, we see up to at least 24 to 25. There are more. There could be even up to, I think, 30, 35 terpenes. We're measuring 23 to 25 of them. There's quite a range. There's anything from what we call volatile terpenes like pinene, beta pinene, alpha pinene, linalool. Then you've got your what we call mid-eluters or sort of moderately volatile things like eucalyptus or eucalyptol. You've got geraniol acetate. These impart different aromas. The synergistic effect with cannabinoids obviously is under study at the moment. So trying to work out exactly how it all works is really interesting at the moment. But what we see is a lot of late eluting compounds like bisbilol. You've got gualol, I think there is. There's a few others on my list here. Humulene, carofilene oxide as well, and carofilene. Carofilene is a principal component or terpene of cannabis. So there's a whole range of things. They're all there at small amounts, less than anywhere under 0.5, definitely under 1%. Generally around the 0.1 to 0.5%. Generally that's where they're found. If in a botanical setting, not so much as I found in testing oils, depending on if it's a whole plant extract, we do find them. If it's not, if it's usually from isolates, no, the terpenes are gone. Carofilene tends to persist a little bit in the process, in the manufacturing, so we do see that, but not much.
And interestingly, there's one last little bastion, which I know is not very readily easy. You know what I'm already going to ask you, but this next kind of people started with major cannabinoids and they moved to minors, then they moved to terpenes, and there's now a kind of interest in flavonoids.
Yes, there is. Yes, we've got requests there. No, it's a complex area there. Hard to get standards. Look, they're available. I haven't been looking for them in our chromatography work. Certainly some requests have come through on those, and certainly we're interested in looking at that. Getting standards for those is very, very expensive. So that sort of test profile is at another level. It's technically feasible, not an issue. It's just that the instrumentation, okay, you've got that. We've got the instrument. Do we have the standards? Well, we need that. Do we have extraction procedures? Do we have those? but it's actually doing. Can it be reliably determined? Is the method robust enough? And that's what we're trying to do. And I think that's the angle that I see coming through quite a bit. We're not in that position, but we'll probably look at that pathway some way at some time down the track and see what we do. It's just trying to find suitable standards. We have to go to different sources to find them. Current supply chains are very expensive.
Yeah,
going through the current supply chains.
I had a question on something, Mitch. Sorry if I just, it's around the just this potency. So one of the reasons why I think a lot of people take comfort having a legal product is that they expect that what's on the label accords with what's in the product. So I recall seeing last year the TGA did a bit of a sort of a random spot check of some of the top products that had been requested through the special access scheme portal. So these were at the time some of the best selling medicinal cannabis products in Australia. And there was a sort of a bit of a public name and shame exercise that followed, which certainly stirred the industry into a bit of a frenzy. But I'm just curious, did you follow that, and what were your thoughts on that whole thing, and just generally around potency?
Yes. Oh, no. I was aware that a testing program was to be initiated, but when it was to occur, I wasn't aware, and I was alerted to it probably a week or two after the testing was completed and the results were published. So, and we're involved in 2 product lines. We looked at our results and looked at what was published, and in a sense, we're quite pleased that we really got over the line for the client, and that we're within the specifications, allowable specifications for that product. And the products, without naming names,
sorry to jump in, but if I can clarify it, just to jump in. So, in terms of for those at home who would have medicinal cannabis, the allowable threshold is 10%. Way, right? On a stated, and I think it's 20% for flower.
Correct. That's correct. So yes, so we had the results for both product types, and we're within the specifications, allowable specifications for that product. We had one product that was just outside those specs, but though we felt. We understood those results to be not unexpected, but and quite reasonable, because the margin of error that the TGA put forward wasn't divulged, so that we didn't have a sort of a measure of their uncertainty in their results when they published those results, so that one could gauge where that range was for that product, and even though they put a ruler up and said it's 10%, but in any testing you do, particularly as we found in the botanical setting, in a natural product, this variation is real, and so that your testing regime needs to be carefully examined to see where your uncertainty lies, and if you're producing a particular number. There's an uncertainty around that number, and that may mean it might be under the regulations, the threshold 10%, or just over. But that's your allowable uncertainty. You say that's okay, and so we found that to be the case in the product we tested, so that we felt quite comfortable, and in fact the client did as well. They obviously went back to the TGA and explained the situation. I think there was a bit of argy-bargy going on there, so to speak. The other stuff with the botanicals, it was interesting because there was, from the TGA's point of view, we understood there was no correction for moisture, and that's an important facet of any botanical testing. You must correct for the moisture levels, and of course, when you do that in this particular product, if I can remember correctly, it brought it within the specifications. That moisture correction bumps up the result,
right,
so to speak. So that was not clear in the release of those results that they were moisture corrected. And so I think that was sorted out sometime later. And of course, what you must do in any testing, and in fact, we learned this the hard way too, in terms of when we doing this work initially, you're producing, you're doing some work, and the specifications of the TGA didn't allude to any moisture correction. So that was missed, so to speak. And so obviously now you tend to incorporate that in any result.
Yeah, and I think
but it is a concern for those patients who might have a product. Going back to the patient, because it's been patient-centric, it's important they have confidence in the results that come from the laboratory testing. It's just a shame that really some gauge of uncertainty wasn't produced at the time, because we would have got a better understanding of the product that was available and was coming out and was available to patients. Yeah. But look, I think it was a wake-up call to the industry. So that's perhaps something that needed to be done. Perhaps the circumstances that under which they did them were probably a bit controversial. But yeah, that was an interesting time.
That water correction sounds a little bit like the something it took me a minute to learn about, which was the acid molecule correction, when you don't just count CBD, CBDA.
That's right.
0.877.
That's the number. Yeah, that's the magic. Yes, you've got to get what's called equivalence. It's got to be, because obviously with let's say THC, it's the availability of the total amount of THC to the patient, and so the acid form is included because the actual combined THC is available to the patient, and that includes the acid form. But you correct for that, the fact that it's got an acid group on it, and then that brings down the measurable amount of THCA, but you then add the THC as a total available THC result. And you do that with CBD as well. So that's an worldwide industry, provision of data. You need to provide both sets, and individually you need to provide out what the THCA result is, and also the THC, and then combine them.
So just coming back to the kind of margin of error, and maybe getting it tested in one place and getting it tested elsewhere, and having a different result.
Yes.
When I think about it, and maybe when the average weed enthusiast out there thinks about it, you think, okay, it's gone to the lab.
Yep.
That is a scientific process. It's mathematically based.
Yes.
How can it come up with a different result depending on where you went? Are you able to walk us through how that does occur?
Yes. Look, there is a lack of standardization amongst the methods that are utilized in most laboratories, and that's just not in the Australian jurisdiction. That's a worldwide thing, and I understand that is being addressed. It's a very important one. The methodologies generally used have come from an identifiable source, a recognized source. There's a European pharmacopoeia, there's the German pharmacopoeia, there's also the Dutch pharmacopoeia. These are recognized methods of testing, and they've been utilized by a lot of the laboratories, and it's also published peer-reviewed methods out there as well. And they're quite robust. What they lack, from what we can see at the moment, what they lack, and this in time, this standardization will occur and will be better for everyone. What they lack is this inter-laboratory studies. There's a lack of that because it's a new emerging industry, and it still is that in that sense from a testing point of view. There hasn't been a lot of laboratories that have come together to put together proficiency programs that address that issue and say, okay, X amount of methods are out there being utilized. How do we find out, which ones are good and viable, and how do we compare laboratories? And so there's a lot of work going on in ensuring there's some sort of standardization amongst the labs. And so the proficiency programs will really address that issue. And also, I understand the AOAC, which is the Association of Official Chemists, they have begun the standardization process for medicinal cannabis. And there's a lot out there now. I think they've signed off on several methods. They're not, I wouldn't say their TGO specific methods, because the TGO is a specific Australian procedure or process, but they address the issues the international laboratory, how would I say it, jurisdictions, they would address issues of potency and microtoxins, microbiology. So they look at everything in the medicinal cannabis area from a pharmaceutical point of view, and they would address all the issues of testing so that the industry will adopt these industry standards in time. So they will come, and but look, validation is an important aspect of any laboratory. So validation where you have an in-house method that works, and you produce the data that suggests it works, and you can prove that. That is really where labs are at this stage in their process, and as long as they do it to an international standard, there's a recognised international standard of validation, then really those tests they should be pretty robust. But laboratories, from one lab to another, there is variation. You do see it mostly, and this is the reality, you do see it mostly in the botanical testing. So not so much in the oils. The oils, if you think about it, is just a finished product.
Yeah.
Everyone should get pretty much the same result. We're not talking about genetic variation or instability in an oil product.
Yeah.
There's pretty much it's a controlled finished product, and that sort of variation, large variation, shouldn't be happening.
So, but that actually brings me to a question: what's your perspective on GMP as a chemist? You're probably well equipped to have a perspective on the importance of, or not importance of, GMP in something like
GMP
cannabis.
Being a good manufacturing practice, a pharmaceutical manufacturing standard, just for those playing along at home.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Well, of course, that's the model that the TGA have set out 4 years ago when they put all this in the pipeline about where they want to see medicinal cannabis. Of course, it's still controversial about why it's going down that pathway. From our perspective, it's a model that we accept that needs to be adopted as a NATA accredited lab. So what we have is a minimum standards as a NATA accredited laboratory, and that's what a lot of laboratories are around Australia. There are GMP labs. There are a few of them. They're not sprinkled around like they are NATA accredited labs. It's another level of operation and scrutiny. We're, in fact, as a lab, we're a smaller NATA accredited lab focused on medicinal cannabis testing, according to GGO 93. Although we do research as well in medicinal cannabis. So there's a research profile that we're developing. But from a GMP point of view, we know we need to work towards that standard and adopt that standard from a laboratory point of view. So we need to look at accreditation to a GMP standard so that our testing protocols and procedures can undergo that sort of level of scrutiny that's undergone in other jurisdictions around the world. And then our results, whatever we produce, are acceptable to any jurisdiction that has the GMP accreditation. So it is something that's, you can't ignore it really. If you want to undertake a lot of stability testing, they're particularly on finished products, and those products are to go into international jurisdictions like Germany, then you will need to be at that level, operate at that level, and begin to operate at that level and see yourself over the line in time. But you need the resources and personnel. Now, we're as a company, we're working towards that. It's some time off. I've still got to get a few more resources like staffing to be able to do that. But I think our plan is there. It's an achievable goal. It is. It's just about,
Yeah, I think it's
important.
It's certainly the other end of the spectrum to what happens in America. I mean, there's heaps of just
I know.
kind of,
Yes,
there's a few cowboy labs over
yeah,
there.
there are. Yeah, there are. It is. Look, it's going to impact on everything because the accessibility to cannabis is still, as we all know, is still challenging. The price of obtaining medicinal cannabis is challenging. These having a GMP oversight is really going to add to the cost. We all have to bear that. We'll see how this develops. We certainly have a commitment to it, but it's something that we just have to.
It'll come.
It'll come. And it's just that if you want to be working in other jurisdictions and have big export to other countries, then it's necessary. But the patient, what does the patient see? What does it mean to the patient? It just means two things. You certainly got a high quality product. Definitely that's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
But you do have additional cost and accessibility.
Yeah.
I think I've got. I'm not sure if you've got more questions, Andrew, but I've got one.
I got one more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
You go or me?
You go, Mitch.
I know that there's a lot of people, and this is not just a licensed cultivator or manufacturer question. I think lots of people are wising up to the method of extraction that is used to, even on the black market, people are talking about CO2 versus ethanol, butane, all these different methods. I'd love to get your perspective on the pros and cons of each, because I think there are different pros and cons of each. And I think the industry tends to lean a lot towards CO2, but depending on what your goal is, it's my understanding that there's different methods that may be more beneficial, less beneficial.
Yeah, of course. It's a good question, that one. From a lab point of view, ethanol works quite well. I mean, we don't have a sort of a lab or bench type CO2 extractor, nor will we purchase one unless it's maybe from a research point of view, or try to do other things in cannabis. Ethanol at a macro level, at the level of manufacturing, works very well, as we know. It's a safe solvent. It's an accessible and inexpensive solvent to use. But there are you do have problems with waste streams and how you manage those waste streams as well. CO2 is obviously, people talk about carbon dioxide, and they think of the greenhouse effect and what that impact might be, but totally unrelated aspect. But you're using CO2 as a powerful solvent to remove or to extract out the cannabinoids. Depending on the conditions, CO2 is it's a non-polar solvent. It acts like a liquid and acts like a gas at a critical point, and it is proven technology. What it is, I suppose, it's a little. There's a lot more specialised people, or it needs specialised people to be able to operate with CO2. And I think from a transport point of view, it's quite safe. You can easily move CO2 around, and you're basically left with a CO2 gas, which is obviously vented to the atmosphere after the process is finished. But it does. I think you can actually tinker with the specific conditions of CO2 to extract your cannabinoids, your terpenes, maintain the integrity of those chemicals as well in the extraction. And also, what I think, ethanol is great at pulling out chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is something that people don't want, as well as some fatty acid types and other lipids that are present in the botanicals. So you really got to. It depends on really what the market is, what the market is really wanting to do. It's a choice for the manufacturer and where their revenue streams are. So, but they're both necessary, and they'll work hand in hand. And I think you won't see the demise of ethanol as an extraction solvent, and likewise CO2 will probably only increase in terms of use.
in
the industry. So that's how I see it. But as I said, from a lab point of view, I only see it as ethanol, and that's our solvent. But that's one of the primary solvents.
When people say that, you know, ethanol might leave a residue that could be harmful to the end patient, is that a genuine concern?
Well, yeah. Well, it is there. That's a reality. Pulling out all the ethanol, or removing all the ethanol is probably a challenge. And that's why in a finished product, you must do solvent residue testing. The limits around that are quite generous. There's ppms of solvents in an end product are not a problem, particularly when it depends on the class of solvents that are being tested. But ethanol is one of those there where there's a generous limit and the amount that's there. It's not going to make anyone go over the limit in any way, not at all. It's just can they be perceived in the oral uptake of a cannabis oil or whatever it might be. I don't know. Solvents or in capsules, because obviously there's a lot of medicinal cannabis being prepared in capsules. I don't know. I don't have enough information or industry knowledge to know what the impact is. All I know is there are generous limits on those solvents in the end product, and it's easy to see them when they're there.
Last question from me. I just noticed when we were talking before about the process from when somebody drops off their sample to you, you put it into the vial, it goes into the chromatography machine. Yeah. We never got to hear the part about the tasting notes that you do. So and I'm just curious, when you send back to the client a report which has your cannabinoids, your terpene potencies, do you ever sort of attach tasting notes just to sort of No.
I'll be honest. I enjoy the lab aspect of the cannabis and the testing part, and we see it come in. It's there. I have no. Mine's it's funny. I'm pretty boring like that, but it's more of a professional interest in it. I've not even had cannabis. Taken it. It's there, and I look at it. I do like the aroma, but I've not tasted. No, of course, I haven't tasted anything, so I have no idea. I'll be honest though, there is.
There's all the different smells from the different.
Oh yeah, from that. Yes, you do pick those up. Although they tend to, because there's a lot of carotene and some other terpenes, they tend to be the predominant ones that hit you when you open up particularly a botanical, or take it out of the bag or out of the canister, wherever if it's a finished product. The oils not so much. The oils are. You really just pick up the oils, really the smell of oils, the MCT oil, if there is any odor. But there is some perceptible odor, but not so much the terpene. There are issues around what's come across our desk recently, but it's very hard to get a grip on it and understand what's going on, because it could be a personal thing. But there's issues around bitterness in some of these products, the oil products, and the patients, I understand, have complained about the bitterness. And look, I know I've tasted MCT oil, so you put it on it's very bland. It's just an oil, olive oil. I mean, oil is a bit more aromatic, but these other things in this finished medicinal product tends to be pretty bland. So I don't know what's going on there, where there's some rancicity going on, issues around that. So there's things that testing around that needs to be done. Yeah. So but. No tasting notes or anything like that. Not that I can put down on anything.
No wafting THC distillate.
No, nothing like that. No.
What a shame.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It is. No, it's interesting. This stuff is interesting. It's fascinating stuff. It really is. I think there's obviously a lot more work to be done. As I said, the lab is doing that sort of routine testing program, but also there's more as researchers get involved. There's another stream of testing or research that needs to be done and be a part of it. As I said, we're sort of a cog in the wheel, where we're part of the process of bringing cannabis out. And from our point of view, we'll undertake some research projects that are not routine, but they may be slightly different, and that's quite satisfying when you see things like that, and you start to see that some results that the clients are interested in, or some of the researchers are wanting to see. Basically just using the tools that we have to be able to, put some of the testing in perspective.
Well, you, as I said at the outset, I mean, you guys just play such a vital and important role
Yeah,
in more products than I would think most people.
Yeah, we have now after a few years. I've seen a lot of stuff come through. Look, it's the botanicals. You get your resins as well. The resins from the research, there's some research groups out there with research licenses, and so resins are being tested as well. Obviously, they're very concentrated materials. Then you've got this other side, which I haven't alluded to, but there's also hemp food and hemp products, and they also have come to the fore from a testing point of view. And so that's the flip side of sort of cannabis, where you got cannabis medicinal and you got hemp as well. So that's fascinating. But cannabis is a fascinating product, and it's obviously its importance in addressing addressing sort of issues in clinical settings. I think it's going to be one of the biggest things going forward. I think cannabis is here to stay, and I think we play a part, and obviously there's a lot of industry partners where we obviously see cannabis as being a vital part of the development of the industry.
Absolutely.
We appreciate that you run a professional outfit, and that if you're
we try,
and that if your lab asks,
I've got a logo. That's
exactly. If your lab asks you if they need a minimum of 1 kilo of organic material, there's something else going on, I think.
Yes. Well, look, when you say that, look, numbers, the amount, it's a struggle for a lab sometimes. When it's interesting because from the outset, there was a clear understanding that labs would get a small amount of cannabis for testing. When you realise what the industry is trying to do and the need for that testing, the amount that can come through a lab is significant, and managing that has become a challenge, because you might get a gram or two, you might get 5, you might get 10. Fine, they can manage those things. But when people are legitimate companies and cultivators, manufacturers say, "Oh, I've got a batch of 100 grams or 200 grams, to process to test," that's at your limit, and those sort of challenges hit us pretty hard, because we have to remove or send back as best we can, as quickly as we can, the cannabis we already have. That has been quite challenging. I believe the TGA or the ADC is addressing that issue now. So the labs soon will not have that imposition of this amount of cannabis, that they're allowed to have this maximum amount. And I think that's a welcome change, because otherwise the industry, from a business point of view, it's very challenging to actually
be sending back and forth.
Absolutely.
I imagine there would be people out there that would volunteer their time to come to the lab and just vaporize,
move it out.
That stock that is.
That's right. They easily take it away from us.
Yeah,
absolutely.
They could be on the payroll, but no, very good. Well, no, Vince, thank you so much for chatting to us. It's honestly been so enlightening to hear a bit more on the product testing side.
Yes.
I hope all the listeners got something out of that, really seeing how important the role is that you guys play in helping this industry mature, keeping it honest. So it's
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. We do have a role. I appreciate that. The industry is we're a derivative of the industry. If the industry matures and goes in the right direction, then testing is here. Obviously, you've got to have a commitment to do this testing. There's no doubt it's quite challenging and very fast-paced at the moment. And so, look,
you're going to be around for a lot longer.
I'm staying on course. I've just got to throw more resources at it, as any lab does. you really, I wouldn't say any lab would say I've got all the resources I need, because it's not, you just don't have enough.
It's a moving feast.
It's a moving feast.
We will, I'm sure, check in again.
Yeah, we will.
And we'll do another one of these, because I want to hear more about what you're seeing in the lab, and we can do it all down the track. But
I can give you more anecdotal stuff without naming names.
yeah. Or we can name names next time. I don't know.
Name names.
No, thank you so much, Vince. We'll we'll wrap it up there. We just thank you for coming on, and we'll look forward to the next one. And
appreciate it, Mitchell, and appreciate it, Andrew. Appreciate coming on board and giving our perspective.
Absolute pleasure.
We're not too boring, but
no, definitely one of the more highbrow ones. But I think we need that once in a while. Otherwise,
our listeners will hopefully have absorbed a lot of info. And to those listening, just please hit like and subscribe. Tell your friends and family about this podcast if you think they'll get something out of it. But thanks so much, Vince. Until next time, take care.
Thanks, gentlemen. We'll be in touch. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Cheers, Vince.
Thanks very much for